Hi everyone, my name is Paul Dirks, and this is hopefully the first in a series of videos on gender dysphoria and transitioning and trans-related issues from the standpoint of the peer-reviewed medical literature. There is so much that is going on in our world around these kinds of issues, gender identity being taught in schools, exponential amounts of children or increases in children presenting at gender clinics for help. And it's just a highly politicized issue. There's a real need for clarity around what what the data really says on some of these important issues. So today we're gonna be talking about desistance and persistence of gender dysphoria in children. Just right at the outset, I want to say that I love trans people, I love detransition people, I love gays, lesbians, straight, and my whole purpose is to bring some clarity around some of these issues where so many people don't know the literature. I've been really surprised myself as I interact, whether it's online or whether it's in person, with people that frankly, I kind of assume should know more than they do. And sometimes I'll mention some stuff about the studies, and they just don't know. They haven't read the literature. Now, somebody might ask, why should we trust you? My short answer is don't. Don't trust anybody. Go do the research. That's what I'm here to help you to do. I'm actually going to point to the literature. And I hope you don't believe me. I hope you go try to prove me wrong. And I think what you'll see is that the vast majority of children that have gender dysphoria, that it goes away in their adolescence. So I'm going to show you some statements in the literature that not only say that, I'm going to show you the actual data with a meta-analysis, take you through a few of the issues. This is going to be kind of a medium depth kind of video. Maybe at another point I'll do a follow-up going into some further detail, but hopefully for most people this will probably be sufficient. I've done a lot of reading in the literature. I've read over 400 peer-reviewed medical journal articles on sex and gender. I've also appeared before the Senate of Canada or the legal committee on Bill C-16, where I spoke mainly on the issues of protections and privacy for women when it comes to gender identity in private spaces. But I have some experience, quite a bit of experience reading in the literature around kind of the medical issues as well. So let's take a look at some things. Okay, so let me show you some statements in the literature that would back up my assertion there. So this is, first of all, this is 2011, Thomas Steensma. Here it is. I'll show you the main part, the title there. Interestingly, this was published, I guess it was published in both 2010 and 2011. I think it's usually cited as Steensma 2011, but it's called Desisting and Persisting. It's a qualitative study, so you can't use it to derive numbers like what we're going to see in the spreadsheet on the meta-analysis, but a good study nonetheless. In fact, I highly recommend it. So here, if you look just down here, right in this area, it says feelings of gender dysphoria. All right, feelings of gender dysphoria persisted into adolescence in only 39 out of 246 of the children. All right, he's talking about all the studies that had been done up until that point, 2011. So 15.8%. All right, so according to this, then the desistance would have been right around 84%. All right, who were investigated in a number of prospective follow-up studies, and I think the only one I don't have there that I don't have down on my master list is that first one by Backwin in 1968. He goes on to say, although the persistence rates differed between the various studies, between 2% to 27%, the results, this is so important, unequivocally showed that the gender dysphoria remitted, went away after puberty in the vast majority of children. All right, now if you read literature, you know that people don't throw around this word unequivocal a lot. All right, so this is simply what the literature says. The results unequivocally show that the gender dysphoria remitted after puberty in the vast majority of children. So let me show you a similar statement in again by the same guy, but this is now in 2013. So this is after a couple years later, after Singh's study had come out as well, but similarly here says, at the time of follow-up in adolescence or adulthood, these studies showed that for the majority of children, the GD desisted. All right, so let me show you the, let's see, let me show you the full desistance. Okay, here we go. Let's spend a little bit of time here. This is kind of my meta-analysis of the studies on desistance and persistence. This is, except for that first one that was done in the 60s, this is every single one that was on the list that you just saw actually in Steensma 2011. This is, to my knowledge, every study that has ever been done on the question, okay? Nothing cherry-picked here. This is the data, the raw data, okay? So let me take you through some of this, all right? First of all, on the left here, we've got the year, all right? Followed by the author, whether the group studied were males, were females, in some cases mixed. Next, we have the sample size, all right? Green is good. It means a larger sample size. Red, as you can imagine, the earlier studies, as you're just starting to build up, the science on this, you've got the smaller studies. This is the age at which the children were initially assessed on average. This was the length of time, all right, between the initial assessment and the follow-up assessment, all right, at which point they did their study. So this is a really important number. Green is good, it means it's longer. Red is not as good, it means it's shorter. This is the time at which they did the follow-up study. And again, if you've got, you want this number to be high. And then you get into the desistance rates, okay? Male for female for mixed. In some of the cases where there's mixed, some of them you could break apart into the male and female, so that's good. And then I'm going to mention a few notes here in a little while. So if you just go to, here they all are. Here's Davenport 1986. Here's Zuger in I think this is 1986 as well. Where is it? Oh, it's 84. I actually had those in the wrong order. This is Wallian and Cohen-Katenis. This is from the Netherlands group. This was 2008. Drummond, this is from the Canadian group. This is 2008. This is the 2011 Steensma qualitative study. And then this is Duvita Singh's doctoral dissertation, one of the best, I think it is the best study, ever done on the subject. And you can download this for free. It's available on the internet. Highly recommend it. It's a little bit longer, but it's very well done, very in depth. And then this is the most recent study done by Steensma and the Netherlands group in 2013. All right, let's go back to our table here. Let's just take you through this a little bit chronologically here, all right? The first study that was done that had really any size to it, any decent sample size, was Green in 1987. It's in a book form. I don't have it on me, but I've looked at it in the library, so I've skim read it, including going into some detail in a number of places. And so you can see that the length of time in which he studied the boys was actually pretty good. It was 12 years. And he found that almost 98% of the boys desisted in their gender identity troubles. All right. Interestingly, it's the only study that's ever been done that had a control group, which is fascinating. So that might be a useful thing for somebody to do in the future. Moving on to Zucker and Bradley, this is coming from the Canadian group in 1995. This is from the book Gender Identity Disorder and Psychosexual Problems in Children and Adolescents. Actually, I'm holding that in my hands right now. And they found that 80% of their group, that was all males, desisted. But even interestingly, of the 9 persisters, 6 of them, 3 of them didn't want sex reassignment surgery. So that's interesting. Now, the other interesting thing here too is that you've got one of the lower assessment times at follow-up, right? Where you've got some of them are being assessed as little as at 13 years. So this 80% number, that's actually it's probably low, right? Due to the shorter follow-up time and the younger follow-up time. Of course, those two things coincide. Next, in 2008, from the Netherlands group, you've got Wallian and Cohen-Katenis doing a study that had a mixed group, like Zucker and Bradley's. Sample size was pretty good, 77. Length of time, kind of in the middle, 10 years. And there you had a mixed desistance rate of 73%. That's the lowest number ever found, all right, of any study, which broke out into 80% desistance of the males and 50% desistance of the females. All right. Moving on to Drummond, 2008. This was the only study ever done of all females, and interestingly, of course, as you would expect, a smaller group. If you look historically, females were always a smaller group. Gender identity issues always presented in males at far greater levels until very recently. We'll maybe address this in a subsequent video about the ratio changes that we find. And there, interestingly, 88% of the females desisted in their gender dysphoria. So you start to see some pretty consistent numbers here, right? In the 80 to 90% range. Although you do have a couple that are lower if you break it out for the females. And then you have Devita Singh 2012, best study ever done, in my opinion. It's the highest sample size. It is also the longest time period. And interestingly here, the full number was close to 88% desistance. And helpfully, Singh also was able to take a look at, breaking it down into who had the full gender identity disorder diagnosis and who was sub-threshold. And unlike the Netherlands studies that found considerable differences between those two groups, there was not very little difference between those two groups at all. Statistically insignificant. So, 86.4% with the full GID diagnosis desisted. And then you've got Steensma, and Steensma is helpful for a number of reasons. But first of all, let's take a look at some of the numbers here as far as the study is concerned. A great sample size, but then a very short amount of time between TO and T1, and of course the children here, or the adolescents. I mean, they're in the middle of adolescence here when they're when the study is done. Many of them. And so you would expect that, if they had, if you'd follow them up for a longer period of time, and especially if there was no transition, which is an important point that we'll get to in a minute, that these numbers would go up, and probably go up significantly. All right. So, here you've got, it's almost half the time of Devita Singh. Okay. So the total number was 74% desistance. Okay, the males again were higher than the females. Now the interesting thing here, though, is that Steensma breaks things out by a number of different aspects. One is whether they were socially transitioned or not. I want to show you that. So here's Steensma 2013. It's the quantitative study, and here is the table where you find, let me just make this a little bit smaller, where you find some of the characteristics of those who desisted and persisted. And so here you've got the social role, okay, where you've got it broken out by, those who had not transitioned at all, those who had partially transitioned, and those who had completely transitioned, and whether they desisted or persisted in their gender dysphoria. Now, what do I mean by transition? Well, if a child takes on a pronoun that is different than their biological sex, sexist pronoun, then that would be, a social transition. If they dressed like the opposite sex, that would be a social transition. If they, what's the other thing that I'm forgetting here? Pronouns, dress, and the other thing is name, of course. And so if somebody took on a name of their, their preferred gender, then that too would be counted as a social transition. And so what we found in this study is that the numbers of those who desisted, let's bring that up again. The number of those who desisted, if they didn't have any social transition, was 74%. Okay? The total was 63%. Those who didn't socially transition was 74%, right? And again, this is in the shorter time frame, so this would have been right up in the 80 to 90% range if it was longer. But those who had any social transition, the desistance rate was only 35%. Okay, now that is a staggering number and difference. And, this should cause us a tremendous amount of concern that people that are, transitioning children, even to the degree that, okay, you can wear, whatever you want. You're a boy, but if you want to wear dresses, this is actually a highly dangerous thing to do, that it reduces desistance of these gender troubles, right? Gender dysphoria. So, what we're seeing right now is that kids who have gender identity challenges or dysphoria out and out, that they're being placed on this fast-moving conveyor belt, right through, starting from social transition, through to puberty blockers, to cross-sex hormones, and then to the surgeries, double mastectomies, genital reconstruction. They're on lifeline. They have lifelong medicalization, sterilization. And this is really serious stuff, because the data is exceptionally clear that that in the vast majority of cases, even to socially transition a child, you're doing the wrong thing. All right, you have a 10 to 20% chance of doing the right thing, essentially, if indeed you believe even that that transition, for instance, medical transition is the right thing. So this is a serious issue. The data is all on one side. It's all on the side of, listen, what on earth are we doing teaching gender identity to kids? What on earth are we doing even socially transitioning a child, let alone medically transitioning a child? Let them work it out. Support them. Teach a child what's good about being a boy, what's good about being a girl, and let them go through it. The adolescence years are fraught with all sorts of perils, but more than that, you're just beginning to figure out who you are, right? And anybody that's gone through adolescence, you should know that. I think we're really doing a tremendous amount of damage to children with what's going on these days. This kind of stuff that's going on in the schools. I absolutely believe that in 5 to 10 years, we will see multi-million-dollar lawsuits of gender clinics, of WPATH. This is serious stuff, and the data is all on the side of those who, at the very least, are saying, listen, don't transition a child. The data is really clear. So let's deal with a couple of challenges sometimes people will throw at these issues, at this the statement that we've seen it directly from Steensma, that it's the unequivocal finding that the vast majority desist. What do the trans advocates do with this? Well, let me start by saying this. All right, let me start by saying that a lot of trans advocates simply don't know. They haven't read the literature, okay? And I've interacted with people. There's a leading trans advocate here in BC, Canada, by the name of Morgane Auger, who simply doesn't know the research. Is a strong advocate for kids transitioning, and is also vice president of the NDP. I don't know. I can't imagine that continuing much longer, just with the level of ignorance that this individual has around the literature in particular. There might be some other ignorance going on, but at the very least, just doesn't know the literature. Glenn Hansman, our BCTF president, again, over Twitter, had some interaction. He doesn't seem to know these things. But every once in a while, there'll be somebody that does know a few things, and they'll throw a few objections to this 80 to 90% desist statement or this generalization that we have clearly in the literature. One of the things that's thrown at this once in a while is that Devita Singh's study in 2012 is not peer reviewed. That is true, and yet what we find, and here I'm going to bring it up, is that if you just do a search for Devita Singh 2012, you can get the PDF, and you'll see here that it's cited by all sorts of people in the literature. All right. So every once in a while, somebody gets persnickety with me about this, and I'll just say, hey, listen, if Thomas Steensma, one of the leading gender researchers in the world, can cite Devita Singh, Zucker, who's been vilified, but his finger. If you've read the literature, I mean, the guy, you can't read the literature without reading Zucker. So every once in a while, I actually kind of like it when somebody says, don't even mention Zucker, and that just tells me that you haven't read anything. Vanderlyn, Blanchard, you go to the second page, you've got De Vries. I mean, everybody I shouldn't say everybody, tons and tons of citations of Singh in the literature. Clearly it's a good study that can be cited. The other thing that's mentioned, and it's about, and here let me bring up Steensma here. Where is it? Steensma, Wallian. Okay, well, let's go here. In Wallian, and I believe in Steensma as well, they have, here, I'm going to go to it. I think it's actually here in the table. If I remember correctly, here it is. So here you've got the fact that there were some non-responders, all right? You see in the right column of Steensma 2013. It was the case with Wallian in 2008 as well. And what they've done is that they have classified the non-responders with the desisters, okay? And there are some people that have, raised a red flag over that and said, listen, you're inflating the numbers of desisters by doing that. You simply don't know because they didn't respond. Now, if somebody has read the literature, sometimes people are just parroting things they hear. If you've actually read the studies, they address this. And what they say is that, listen, in Netherlands, the Amsterdam Clinic is the only place where kids and adolescents can get treatment for gender dysphoria, where you can get puberty blockers, where you can get cross-sex hormones, and so they're making actually a very good assumption, which is that if your gender dysphoria is so bad that you need these things, then when we're trying to get in touch with you, trying to help you through these things, and you don't want them, that probably means that you don't have this high degree of gender dysphoria anymore. I mean, the only kind of thing that you could posit as being against that point of view, for instance, is if some of these kids, and again, enough to skew the results significantly, left the country and went and got help at a different gender clinic in another place in Belgium or whatever. So it's a really good assumption. People throw that as a red flag of the Netherlands studies, but it's a good assumption to throw the non-responders into the desisters. Not in the least problematic, especially when the common narrative says that the gender dysphoria is so bad that if we don't help them, they're going to commit suicide, which is what we hear quite a bit. Well, if the gender dysphoria is that bad, then they're going to reach out to somebody who wants to help them, who wants to give them these things if they're that bad, and help them, and they're not taking it, right? So it really doesn't make a lot of sense, that red flag. So, are there any other decent objections that are made to this 80 to 90% desist statement? The only one that I've heard that really makes any sense to me, and I don't go along with it. I don't think it's necessarily a valid assertion, but at least it maybe makes a little bit of sense in a certain way. And the assertion is that, over time from the DSM-3 to the 4 to the 4TR, I'm not sure if it changed, if the diagnosis changed from in the TR, I don't think so. And then now to the DSM-5, that under the DSM-4, I believe it is stated that the diagnosis was a little bit less, or a little bit more permissible than in 5 and 3. Of course, in 5, the diagnosis is actually for gender dysphoria and not gender identity disorder. So there's been some change there. More on that later. That's a political issue, and anyways, I won't get into that right now. But so people say essentially that what you have in the studies are a lot of gender nonconforming people, and not necessarily gender dysphoric people, or people that would meet a strong diagnosis. Now, there's no question that in a lot of the studies you've got both people that meet the diagnoses either of gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria. Actually, I'm not sure if 2013. Actually, I think it's probably all GID up to 2013. So you do have both in the studies. There's no question about that. And the better studies, they'll tell you the data, like Steensma does, like Singh does, as far as do the desistance rates change between these two groups. And it really, to me, it's not the least surprising that the ones that have the stronger dysphoria are the ones that desist less. I mean, I think that's just kind of common sense, right? The worse the condition is, the less likely it is that it's going to go away. So as far as that claim is, that makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, actually, though, Singh finds that there isn't a difference between the ones who had the full diagnosis and those who didn't. And to me, that's more shocking than the fact that there would be a difference. Now, here's the thing, though, is that when people make that assertion, which has at least partly a basis in reality, and perhaps somebody like Zucker could go into more detail about, whether, with the, when the diagnoses changed, when the criteria changed for the diagnoses, did they actually do anything different in how they assessed the kids? I kind of have my doubts, but that'd be a question you could ask somebody who's actually doing the assessments. But here's the problem with that assertion. That assertion is arguing for greater gatekeeping. All right? It's arguing for the fact that not all these kids that are going into the clinics have this, strong gender dysphoria, right? Maybe it's only 50%, maybe it's only 25% that actually have this stronger dysphoria. And then of course going along with that if you assess the ones that only had the very strong dysphoria, that the desistance rates would go down, even though there is, the data on that is not clearly the case. So, what I would just point out to that assertion is that, okay, you're arguing for far stricter gatekeeping. Bring it on, right? What we have right now is we've got something that is completely to the other side, where you've got this this affirming paradigm, where the moment a child says, I think maybe I'm a girl, even though I was born a boy, right? Even though I'm biologically a boy, that, the thing you're supposed to do is just go along with that. You're not supposed to question that. You're not supposed to say, well, let's think this through, So, is there some validity to that challenge? Yeah, perhaps some, but it goes completely against the affirming model that everybody is arguing for these days. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense. It really is quite illogical. And most of the challenges that have been made, and even by Kelly Winters, would fall into that category. Kelly Winters did up a PowerPoint at one point that argued that the 80 to 90% persistence, or that the desistance rates are kind of not reliable. And if you look through her PowerPoint, it really is like she's trying to throw all the arguments she can muster against the wall, see if any of them stick, and not realizing that some of them don't even make sense together, right? They don't. They're illogical. They're incoherent. You can't argue, for far greater gatekeeping, and then say that when the moment a kid says, "I'm really a boy," that you need to affirm that. That's incoherent. So here's just wrapping it all up. If you are transitioning a kid right? If you're supporting transitions of kids, if you're teaching kids gender identity, in the schools, you're not doing the right thing. Okay, you have a 10 to 20% chance with any kid that you're doing the right thing, and when the issues lead to lifelong medicalization on hormones. Okay, they're used off label. No one knows, the outcome of decades of hormone use. When you're talking about a kid being sterilized for life, when you're talking about genital reconstruction, double mastectomies, you're talking about amputation of healthy working body parts. These are serious issues. Gender dysphoria goes away in the vast majority of kids. It is the unequivocal finding of the literature. And those of you that haven't read the literature, you need to get out there. You need to, put some data before yourself. Stop the ideological, presuppositions. Be evidence-based, and I hope that things change soon, because if not, there's going to be tremendous amounts of lawsuits in 5-10 years, and a lot of people saying, "Wow, the data was always there. We just didn't see it." So that's desistance and persistence. Hopefully, that's been helpful. We'll deal with another subject maybe sometime soon. Thanks, and take care.